Her mate rejected her in front of the entire pack, choosing her sister instead. Humiliated and desperate, she declared she'd rather marry a stranger. A ragged beggar stepped forward, offering his hand. She said yes. What she didn't know: the homeless man she married to escape her shame was the Alpha King. And he hadn't let go since. The scent of wildflowers and pine should have made this the happiest day of Lyra's life. Instead, standing in the center of the pack circle under the full moon, she felt her heart shatter into 1,000 pieces. I, Darius Kane, Alpha of the Silver Creek Pack, reject you, Lyra Morgan, as my chosen mate. The words echoed through the sacred clearing like a death sentence. 300 pack members fell silent, their eyes wide with shock. Lyra's knees nearly buckled, but she forced herself to remain standing. Her wolf whimpered inside her chest, confused and hurt. What? She whispered, her voice barely audible. This had to be a mistake. They'd been together for 2 years. He'd promised her just last week that tonight would make everything official. Darius stood tall in his ceremonial black suit, his dark hair perfectly styled, green eyes cold as winter ice. At 25, he was everything an alpha should be: strong, handsome, powerful. And he was destroying her in front of everyone she'd ever known. You heard me, he said, his voice carrying across the clearing without effort. You're too weak, Lyra. Too pathetic to be my Luna. Look at you, barely 5'4", skinny as a twig, can't even shift properly half the time. What kind of Luna would that make? Gasps and murmurs rippled through the crowd. Lyra's face burned with humiliation. It was true. Her wolf was smaller than most, and shifting had always been difficult. But Darius had said it didn't matter. He'd said he loved her anyway. I need a strong Luna by my side, Darius continued, his chest puffed out with arrogance. Someone who can bear strong pups and command respect. Someone like. He turned toward the crowd and extended his hand. From the front row stepped Celine Morgan, Lyra's own younger sister. At 22, Celine was everything Lyra wasn't. Tall, curvy, with flowing blonde hair and bright blue eyes that sparkled with ambition. Her wolf was strong, her presence commanding. Celine will be my chosen mate in Luna, Darius announced. The clearing erupted. Some pack members cheered, others gasped in shock. Lyra felt like she was drowning. Her own sister. Her own blood. Celine glided forward in her silver dress, her hips swaying with confidence. When she reached Darius, she turned to face Lyra with a smirk that made Lyra's stomach twist. Sorry, sister, Celine said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. But the best wolf won. How long? Lyra managed to ask, her voice cracking. How long have you two been? 6 months, Darius said with a shrug, as if discussing the weather. Celine came to me. Said she was tired of watching you embarrass our pack with your weakness. She was right. 6 months. While Lyra had been planning their future, dreaming of pups and a life together, they'd been betraying her behind her back. You're pathetic, Lyra, called out Jake Morrison from the crowd. Even I wouldn't want you, and I'm just a gamma. Laughter erupted around the circle. Mean, cruel laughter that cut deeper than claws. Look at her clothes, snickered Sarah Williams. That dress looks like she got it from a thrift store. Because she probably did, another voice added. The Morgan family's been broke for years. No wonder Darius upgraded, someone else called out. Who wants damaged goods? Each insult hit like a physical blow. Lyra wrapped her arms around herself, trying to hold the pieces of her heart together. Her parents had died in a rogue attack 3 years ago, leaving her and Celine with nothing but debts. She'd worked 3 jobs just to survive, dreaming that marrying Darius would finally give her security and love. I can't believe I wasted 2 years on you, Darius said, his lip curling in disgust. You should be grateful anyone even looked at you twice. Something snapped inside Lyra. The hurt transformed into blazing anger that burned away her tears. She lifted her chin and looked Darius straight in the eyes. You know what? She said, her voice growing stronger with each word. I'd rather marry a complete stranger off the street than spend another second with a backstabbing coward like you. The crowd fell silent again. Challenging an alpha publicly was unheard of, especially for an omega. I'd marry a beggar before I'd marry you, Lyra continued, her wolf finally finding its voice. At least a beggar would have more honor than marry one. The deep, gravelly voice came from the edge of the clearing. Every head turned toward the shadows between the ancient oak trees. A figure stepped into the moonlight, and collective gasps echoed through the night. He was tall and lean, wearing torn jeans and a faded black t-shirt. His dark hair was messy and unkempt, hanging in his gray eyes. Dirt streaked his face and clothes like he'd been traveling rough for weeks. He looked exactly like what he claimed to be, a homeless drifter who'd wandered into their territory. But something about him made Lyra's wolf sit up and take notice. There was a strange magnetism in his presence, a quiet strength that seemed to pull at something deep inside her. I'll marry you, the stranger said, his eyes fixed on Lyra's face. Right here, right now. The clearing exploded with laughter. Oh, this is perfect. Celine clapped her hands together in delight. The reject omega and the dirty vagrant. A match made in hell. You can't be serious, Darius snarled at the stranger. You're not even Pack. You're nothing. The stranger's mouth curved into a small smile that didn't reach his eyes. Maybe, but I'm offering something you're not. Which is what? Darius demanded. Respect. The simple word hung in the air like a challenge. The stranger stepped closer to Lyra, his movements fluid and predatory despite his ragged appearance. What's your name? He asked her quietly, ignoring the jeering crowd. Lyra, she whispered, her heart hammering against her ribs. This was insane. She didn't know anything about this man. But looking into his strange gray eyes, she felt safer than she had all evening. I'm Kale, he said. And I'm serious about my offer. You deserve better than this. She deserves exactly what she's getting, Darius snapped. Nothing. Kale's head turned toward Darius, and for just a moment, Lyra could have sworn she saw something dangerous flash in his eyes. Something that made her wolf shiver with recognition. The choice is yours, Lyra, Kale said, extending his calloused hand toward her. But I promise you this. I'll never humiliate you the way they have. Lyra stared at his outstretched hand. Her rational mind screamed that this was crazy. She was about to bind herself to a complete stranger who looked like he hadn't had a decent meal in weeks. But her heart whispered something different. It whispered that anything was better than staying here, watching Darius and Celine build their happiness on the ruins of hers. The crowd held its collective breath as Lyra reached out and placed her hand in Kale's. His fingers were warm and strong, completely steady while hers trembled. Yes, she said loud enough for everyone to hear. I'll marry you. The clearing erupted in chaos. Some people laughed, others shouted objections. But through it all, Lyra kept her eyes on Kale's face, seeing something there she hadn't seen in months. Hope. Elder Patricia stepped forward, her ancient face creased with confusion and concern. Child, you can't possibly. I invoke the right of immediate bonding, Kale said, his voice cutting through the noise like a blade. Under pack law, any unmated wolf can claim a rejected mate with their consent. Patricia's eyes widened. It was an old law, rarely used but completely valid. Very well, she said reluctantly. If both parties consent. We do, Lyra and Kale said together. As Patricia began the ancient bonding words, Lyra caught sight of Celine's face. Her sister's smug expression had been replaced by something that looked almost like fear. But that was impossible. What could Celine possibly have to fear from a beggar? The ceremony was brief but binding. When Patricia pronounced them mated under the eyes of the moon goddess, Kale squeezed Lyra's hand gently. Ready to get out of here, he murmured. Lyra nodded, not trusting her voice. She just married a stranger and burned every bridge she'd ever known. But as Kale led her away from the clearing, past the stunned faces of her former pack, she felt something she hadn't experienced in months. Freedom. Behind them, Darius's angry voice carried on the night air. "You'll regret this, Lyra. You'll come crawling back." But Lyra didn't look back. She was too busy wondering who exactly she'd just married, and why her wolf seemed to recognize something in him that her human mind couldn't quite grasp. 3 hours into their journey, Lyra was beginning to wonder if she'd made the biggest mistake of her life. Kale moved through the dense forest like a shadow, never making a sound despite the thick undergrowth. His pace was relentless but not rushed, and somehow he always seemed to know exactly which direction to go even though there were no trails to follow. "Where are we going?" Lyra asked for the third time, stumbling over a fallen log. Her wedding dress, if she could call the simple white sundress that, was already torn in several places. "Somewhere safe," Kale replied without looking back. It was the same answer he'd given her before. Lyra bit back her frustration. She'd left everything behind to follow this stranger into the wilderness, and he wouldn't even tell her their destination. Her practical side screamed that she was being foolish, but her wolf seemed oddly calm about the situation. Too calm, actually. That was what bothered her most. "Kale, I need to rest," she said, catching her breath. "I'm not used to." He stopped so suddenly that she almost crashed into his back. His head tilted slightly, listening to something she couldn't hear. "What is it?" she whispered. "Company." His voice was flat, emotionless. "Stay behind me." Before Lyra could ask what kind of company, 3 massive wolves emerged from the shadows between the trees. Her heart jumped into her throat. These weren't pack wolves. Their scent was wrong, wild, and dangerous. Rogues. The largest one, a gray wolf with scarred flanks, shifted into human form. The man who appeared was just as intimidating as his wolf, tall, muscular, with dead eyes and a cruel smile. "Well, well," the rogue said, his voice rough as gravel. "What do we have here?" "A pretty little Omega and her homeless boyfriend, lost in our territory." The other 2 rogues circled them, still in wolf form, their yellow eyes gleaming with hunger. Lyra pressed closer to Kale's back, expecting him to shift or run or do something to protect them. Instead, he just stood there, perfectly still. "This is neutral territory," Kale said quietly. "We're just passing through." The rogue leader laughed, a harsh sound that made Lyra's skin crawl. "Nothing's neutral anymore, friend. Everything belongs to someone, and right now you're trespassing on." He stopped mid-sentence. His confident expression flickered, replaced by something that looked almost like confusion. The other 2 rogues had also gone still, their ears flattened against their heads. The leader stammered, then slowly, inexplicably lowered his head. "Forgive me. I didn't realize." Lyra stared in shock as all 3 rogues backed away, their heads down in a gesture of submission. The 2 in wolf form were practically crawling on their bellies. "Safe travels," the leader mumbled, then turned and disappeared into the forest with his companions, leaving Lyra and Kale alone. "What just happened?" Lyra demanded, her voice shaking. "Why did they?" "We should keep moving," Kale said, already walking away. "It's not safe to linger." But Lyra planted her feet and crossed her arms. "No. I'm not taking another step until you explain what just happened. Those rogues were about to attack us and then they just left. Like they recognized you." Kale paused but didn't turn around. "Sometimes rogues can sense danger. Maybe they decided we weren't worth the trouble." It was a lie. Lyra could hear it in his voice, see it in the tense line of his shoulders. But before she could press the issue, a new scent hit her nose. More rogues, and these ones didn't feel friendly at all. "Kale." "I know," this time when he turned to face her. His gray eyes held a dangerous glint. "When I tell you to run, you run. Don't look back, don't stop to help me. Just get as far away as possible. I'm not leaving you two. Promise me." His voice carried an authority that made her wolf want to bare her throat in submission. "Promise me you'll run." Before she could answer, 6 more rogues burst from the undergrowth. These weren't like the first group, they moved with purpose, coordination. Their eyes held intelligence and malice. "There they are," one of them snarled. "The Omega and her new toy." "Our employer wants the girl alive," another added. "But the vagrant dies tonight." "Employer?" Lyra's blood ran cold. Someone had hired these rogues to hunt her down. The rogues attacked all at once, a coordinated assault that should have overwhelmed them instantly. Lyra braced herself for the end, knowing Cale couldn't possibly fight off 6 trained killers. What happened next defied everything she thought she knew about her strange new husband. Cale moved like liquid lightning. One moment he was standing beside her, the next he was in the center of the attacking rogues, his hands moving with lethal precision. A sickening crack echoed through the forest as he snapped the first attacker's neck without apparent effort. The second rogue barely had time to react before Cale's fist connected with his chest, sending him flying 20 feet to crash against a tree trunk. The sound the rogue made when he hit suggested several broken ribs, possibly worse. "Impossible," one of the remaining rogues breathed. "He's just human. I can't smell a wolf on him at all." But Lyra could. Faintly, so faintly she'd missed it before. She caught a scent that made her wolf whimper and cower. It was the smell of power, ancient and absolute. The smell of an alpha. Not just any alpha, but something far beyond anything she'd ever encountered. Cale defeated the remaining 4 rogues in less than 2 minutes. He didn't shift, didn't use claws or fangs. He fought with his bare hands and an economy of movement that spoke of years of deadly training. When the last rogue fell unconscious at his feet, Cale wasn't even breathing hard. He turned to Lyra, and for just a moment, she saw something inhuman flickering in his gray eyes. Something that made every instinct in her body scream both danger and submission. Then it was gone and he was just Cale again. The quiet, gentle man who'd offered her respect when no one else would. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his voice soft with concern. Lyra shook her head, unable to speak. Her mind was racing, trying to process what she just witnessed. No ordinary wolf, no ordinary human could fight like that. The rogues were right. She couldn't smell a wolf on him. But she definitely smelled something else. Something that shouldn't exist. Meanwhile, 200 miles away in Silver Creek territory, Celine Morgan paced frantically in Darius's office. "This is a disaster," she hissed, her blue eyes blazing with fury. "Do you have any idea how this makes us look? The entire pack is talking about how my pathetic sister showed us up." Darius leaned back in his leather chair, his own expression dark. "It's handled, Celine. I've already made some calls." "To who?" "Marcus Reed from the Blood Moon pack owes me a favor. So does Victor Kane from the Shadow Ridge pack. They're sending their best trackers." Celine's eyes lit up with vicious satisfaction. "To bring her back. To make sure she never embarrasses us again." Darius's smile was cold and deadly. "Accidents happen in the wilderness, especially to weak little omegas who bite off more than they can chew. And the vagrant? Collateral damage." Darius shrugged. "Though honestly, we'd be doing him a favor. What kind of life was he going to have anyway?" Celine finally stopped pacing, her anger transforming into cruel anticipation. "How long before they find her?" "A few days at most. Then this whole humiliating chapter of our lives will be closed forever." Neither of them noticed the shadow that moved past Darius's window, or the ears that had heard every word of their conversation. They found shelter in a small cave hidden behind a waterfall just as the first drops of rain began to fall. Cale had spotted it from half a mile away, somehow knowing exactly where to look even though the entrance was completely concealed from view. Lyra sat on a flat stone near the cave mouth, watching the water cascade down like a silver curtain. Her torn dress was finally dry, and she'd managed to braid her tangled hair back from her face. But she couldn't stop thinking about what she'd witnessed earlier. Here Kale's quiet voice made her jump. He was holding out a small bundle wrapped in large leaves. "What is it?" she asked, accepting the surprisingly warm package. "Rabbit. There's a stream about a quarter-mile north. I set some snares while you were resting." Lyra unwrapped the leaves to find perfectly cooked meat, seasoned with wild herbs she couldn't identify. Her stomach growled loudly, reminding her that she hadn't eaten since breakfast. But when she looked up, she noticed Kale didn't have any food for himself. "Where's yours?" she asked. "I'm not hungry." It was a lie. She could see the slight hollowness in his cheeks, the way his clothes hung loose on his tall frame. He was probably hungrier than she was, but he was giving her his portion. "We're sharing," she said firmly, tearing the meat in half. "I won't eat if you don't." For a moment, something soft flickered in his gray eyes. "You don't have to." "Yes, I do." She held out half the rabbit to him. "We're married now, remember? That means we take care of each other." He took the food with a small smile that transformed his entire face. When Kale smiled, he went from mysterious and dangerous to breathtakingly handsome. Lyra felt her cheeks warm and looked away quickly. They ate in comfortable silence, listening to the rain and the waterfall. When they were finished, Kale pulled a thin blanket from his worn backpack. Where had that come from? And spread it on the cave floor. "You should sleep," he said. "We have a long way to go tomorrow." "Where exactly are we going?" Lyra asked, settling onto the blanket. "And don't say somewhere safe. I think I deserve to know by now." Kale was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Finally, he said, "There's a place where no one will look for us. Where you can decide what kind of life you want without anyone telling you what you're worth." "Is that really possible?" The question slipped out before she could stop it. "What do you mean?" Lyra hugged her knees to her chest. No one's ever let me just be myself. My parents loved me, but they were always worried about my weak wolf. Always trying to help me be stronger. The pack saw me as a burden. Darius," she couldn't finish that thought. "Darius was a fool." The certainty in Kale's voice made her look up. He was sitting against the cave wall, his gray eyes intense in the firelight from the small flame he'd somehow conjured. "You don't know me," Lyra said softly. "You don't know what I'm really like." "I know enough." "Like what?" "I know you'd rather face an uncertain future than accept a comfortable lie. I know you stood up to an alpha in front of 300 people because you refused to let him break your spirit. I know you insisted on sharing your food with a stranger who probably doesn't deserve your kindness." Lyra felt tears prick her eyes. "I'm not brave. I was terrified." "Being brave doesn't mean you're not scared. It means you do what's right even when you are scared." "But I'm weak." "My wolf is." "Your wolf fought 6 rogues tonight without shifting and didn't run away." Kale's voice was firm. "You are far stronger than they ever saw." The words hit her like a physical touch. She'd never thought of it that way. That staying to make sure Kale was safe had been brave instead of foolish. "Why do you care?" she whispered. "You don't know me. You're not getting anything out of this marriage. Why are you being so kind?" Kale was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was softer than she'd ever heard it. "Maybe because I know what it's like to be told you're not enough." "Were you rejected too?" Something dark flickered across his face. "In a way." Lyra wanted to ask more, but something in his expression warned her not to push. Instead she said, "I'm sorry. Whatever happened to you, I'm sorry." "Don't apologize." "Sorry I..." She caught herself and felt heat rush to her cheeks. "I mean..." "Okay. You do that a lot," Kale observed. "Do what?" "Apologize for existing, for taking up space, for having needs or opinions or feelings." Lyra looked down at her hands. "It's easier that way. People get less angry if you make yourself small. You shouldn't have to make yourself small for anyone." The gentleness in his voice made something crack open in her chest. When was the last time someone had spoken to her like this? Like she mattered? Like she was worth protecting instead of enduring. I don't know how to be any other way, she admitted. Then learn, he leaned forward slightly. Learn to take up space. Learn to ask for what you want. Learn to believe you deserve good things. And if I make mistakes, then you make mistakes. Everyone does. Lyra studied his face in the firelight. There were so many things about him that didn't make sense. The way he moved like a trained warrior despite claiming to be a drifter. The way rogues bowed to him without explanation. The authority in his voice when he gave commands, as if he was used to being obeyed without question. Kale. Yeah. What aren't you telling me? For just a moment, his careful mask slipped. She saw something in his eyes, pain, longing, and something that looked almost like guilt. I'm telling you everything you need to know right now, he said finally. It wasn't an answer, not really. But the vulnerable way he was looking at her made her heart race in a way that had nothing to do with fear. Are you going to hurt me? She asked quietly. Never. The word came out like a vow. I will never hurt you, Lyra. I swear it on my life. She believed him. Maybe it was naive, maybe it was stupid, but looking into his eyes, she believed him completely. Then that's enough for now, she said. Relief flashed across his features so quickly she almost missed it. Get some sleep, he said, settling back against the cave wall. I'll keep watch. You need rest too. I don't sleep much anyway. And I want to make sure you're safe. Lyra curled up on the blanket, hyper-aware of Kale's presence just a few feet away. She'd never felt safer in her life, which was insane considering she was alone in a cave with a man she'd known for less than 12 hours. But as she drifted toward sleep, listening to the rain and Kale's steady breathing, she allowed herself to imagine what it might be like if this was real. If this strange, kind, mysterious man really did care about her the way he seemed to. The thought scared her almost as much as it thrilled her. Because for the first time in her life, she was starting to think she might deserve to be cared for. And that was the most dangerous thought of all. Lyra woke to the smell of coffee and something that made her mouth water. Sunlight streamed through the waterfall, casting dancing rainbows on the cave walls. She sat up, momentarily disoriented, then remembered where she was and why. Kale was crouched by a small fire near the cave entrance, tending to what looked like fish cooking on flat stones. His hair caught the morning light, and she noticed for the first time that it wasn't just black. There were threads of silver running through it that seemed to shift and gleam. How old are you? She asked without thinking. He glanced over at her, a small smile playing at his lips. Good morning to you too. Heat rushed to her cheeks. Sorry, your hair. I'm 28, he said, turning back to the fish. And I've had silver in my hair since I was 20. Runs in my family. 28. Only 3 years older than her. But there was something in his eyes that seemed ancient. Like he'd seen things that aged him beyond his years. Here he handed her a tin cup filled with coffee and a portion of perfectly cooked trout. We should eat quickly. I want to cover as much ground as possible today. Why the rush? Lyra asked, accepting the food gratefully. The coffee was surprisingly good, rich and strong, with a hint of something she couldn't identify. Kale didn't answer immediately. He was staring out through the waterfall with an expression that made her wolf stir uneasily. Kale, we're being hunted, he said quietly. I can smell them. 3 different packs, maybe more. They're still a day behind us, but they're gaining ground. Lyra's appetite vanished. 3 packs? Who would? She stopped, realization dawning. Celine. This is about what happened at the ceremony. Probably Kale's voice was carefully neutral, but she caught something else underneath. Something that sounded almost like anticipation. You don't seem surprised. I'm not, he met her eyes. Men like Darius don't handle public humiliation well. I knew there would be consequences. Then why did you? She stopped herself before she could finish the question. Why did you marry me if you knew it would put you in danger? But Kale heard the unspoken words anyway. Because some things are worth the risk. Her heart did something complicated in her chest. Before she could respond, he was on his feet, moving with that fluid grace that still amazed her. We need to go. Now. 200 miles behind them, Celine Morgan stood in the Blood Moon Pack's war room, her blue eyes blazing with fury as she stared at the map spread across the oak table. How did they escape the first ambush? She demanded. Marcus Reed, the Blood Moon Alpha, was a massive man with coal-black hair and scars crisscrossing his arms. His yellow eyes held the kind of cruelty that made even other alphas nervous. Your information was wrong, he said bluntly. You said the target was traveling with a weak human. My men reported that the weak human took out 6 trained fighters without breaking a sweat. That's impossible, Celine snapped. He's nobody. A vagrant we found at the ceremony. Then your vagrant has some very interesting skills. Marcus's smile was all teeth. My trackers also reported something else. The rogues they encountered earlier. The ones who backed down without a fight? They weren't afraid of the girl. They were afraid of him. Darius, who had been unusually quiet, finally spoke up. What are you saying? I'm saying we might have underestimated our target. Marcus leaned forward. But don't worry. I've called in some favors. Victor Kane is sending his best hunters, and Elena Cross from the Midnight Pack has agreed to lend us her tracker team. Between the 3 packs, we'll have them surrounded by nightfall tomorrow. I want them both dead, Celine said, her voice cold as winter. I don't care what it costs. Marcus raised an eyebrow. Even if the vagrant turns out to be more than he seems. Especially then. Celine's hatred blazed in her eyes. My sister has already humiliated me once. I won't let her do it again. And whoever this man is, he made the mistake of helping her. That makes him just as guilty. What if they surrender? Darius asked. Celine's laugh was sharp and ugly. There won't be any surrenders. Make sure the hunters understand we want this to look like a rogue attack. No survivors, no witnesses. Marcus nodded slowly. And afterward? What's our story? Tragic news, Celine said with false sweetness. My poor sister and her new husband were killed by rogues while fleeing Pack territory. So very sad. Of course, it just proves that Omega shouldn't make rash decisions based on emotion. The Pack will buy that. The Pack will believe whatever I tell them to believe. Especially once I'm officially Luna and start making examples of anyone who questions my authority. Meanwhile, Lyra stumbled over another root and barely caught herself before falling face first into a patch of thorns. They'd been walking for hours and her legs felt like jelly. But every time she started to complain, she remembered the tension in Kale's shoulders and kept silent. How much farther? She asked during one of their brief rest stops. Not much. Kale was scanning the forest around them, his gray eyes alert. There's a place about 5 miles north. We'll be safer there. What kind of place? He hesitated. An old family property. It's been abandoned for years, but it's defensible. Another piece that didn't fit. How did a homeless drifter have access to abandoned family property? Kale, I need to ask you something. What? Are you really just a vagrant? Because the way you fight, the way you move, the way you seem to know exactly where to go even in unfamiliar territory. She took a breath. You're not what you seem, are you? For a long moment he didn't answer. When he finally looked at her, there was something raw and vulnerable in his expression. No, he said quietly. I'm not. But I can't tell you everything yet. It's not safe. Safe for who? For you? His voice was gentle but firm. There are things about my past that would put you in even more danger if you knew them. Right now, the people hunting us think you married a nobody. If they knew the truth. What truth? Lyra, he stepped closer, his hand hovering near her cheek without quite touching. Do you trust me? She should say no. She should demand answers. Instead, she found herself nodding. Then trust that I'm trying to protect you. When the time is right, when it's safe, I'll tell you everything. But not yet. Looking into his eyes, she saw something that made her breath catch. Pain. Longing. And underneath it all, a power that made her wolf want to submit completely. Okay, she whispered. Relief flooded his features. Thank you. As they continued their journey, Lyra tried to ignore the growing certainty that she was falling for a man who might be completely beyond her reach. Because whoever Kale really was, whatever secrets he was hiding, she was becoming more sure by the hour that he was far more important than a simple Omega like her could ever hope to deserve. But she was also becoming sure of something else. She was willing to find out just how far beyond her reach he really was. Even if it killed her. They traveled through the night, moving by moonlight through dense forests that seemed to go on forever. Lyra's feet were blistered and her legs ached, but she pushed forward without complaint. The fear in Kale's eyes earlier had been real, and that scared her more than anything else. Almost there, Kale murmured, his hand briefly touching her lower back to guide her around a fallen tree. Even that small contact sent warmth shooting through her. Lyra was about to respond when a blood-curdling howl echoed through the darkness ahead of them. Then another. And another. Kale went perfectly still. That's not right. What do you mean? Those howls, they're calling for help. But the scent, he frowned, his nostrils flaring. Something's wrong. Another howl, closer this time. It sounded like a wolf in terrible pain. We should help them, Lyra said automatically. No, Kale's voice was sharp. We keep moving. But even as he spoke, a new sound reached them, the unmistakable whimper of a pup in distress. Lyra's heart clenched. Her Omega instincts screamed at her to help, to protect the vulnerable. Kale, that's a baby. It's a trap. His gray eyes were hard as steel. I can smell at least 8 different wolves out there, and none of them are actually hurt. But what if you're wrong? What if there really is a pup? There isn't, he grabbed her shoulders gently. Lyra, listen to me. This is exactly the kind of thing hunters do. They use recordings, they mimic distress calls. They know Omegas can't resist helping. She wanted to believe him, but the pup's cries were getting more desperate, more heartbreaking. Please, she whispered. What if it's real? Kale stared at her for a long moment, then cursed under his breath. Fine. But you stay here. Hidden. If I'm not back in 10 minutes, you run north until you reach a stream, then follow it upstream. Don't stop, don't look back. Promise me. I promise. He disappeared into the darkness so quickly she barely saw him go. Lyra crouched behind a massive oak tree, her heart hammering against her ribs. The forest fell eerily silent. No more howls, no more whimpering. Even the normal night sound seemed muted. She counted the seconds. 5 minutes. 7. 9. At exactly 10 minutes, she heard Kale's voice in the distance, sharp with anger. There's nothing here. It was definitely a recording. Relief flooded through her. He was coming back. They could continue to safety. She started to stand up when something hard struck the back of her head. Stars exploded behind her eyes as she crashed to the forest floor. Through the ringing in her ears, she heard voices. Got her. The voice was rough, unfamiliar. Target secured. About time, another voice said. The Alpha's getting impatient. Load her up. Lyra tried to move, tried to shift, tried to scream for Kale, but her body wouldn't obey. Something was wrong with her wolf. It felt drugged, distant. Wolfsbane, the first voice explained, as if reading her thoughts. Special blend. She won't be shifting anytime soon. Strong hands lifted her like she weighed nothing. Through blurred vision, she saw at least 6 men in dark clothing, their faces covered by masks. Professional. Military precise. What about the male? Someone asked. Orders are to leave him alive for now. Boss wants him to know she's gone. Wants him to suffer. They carried her deeper into the forest, away from Kale, away from safety. Lyra drifted in and out of consciousness, but one thing remained crystal clear in her drugged mind. This wasn't random. This was Celine. Her sister really was trying to kill her. When she fully regained consciousness, she was in what looked like an abandoned warehouse. Her wrists were bound with silver-lined rope that burned against her skin, and she was chained to a support beam in the center of the room. Well, the familiar voice made her blood run cold. Look who's finally awake. Celine emerged from the shadows, looking perfectly put together despite being in the middle of nowhere. Her blonde hair was styled in an elegant updo, her makeup flawless, her designer clothes clean and expensive. "Hello, sister," Celine said with a smile that never reached her eyes. Celine. Lyra's voice came out as a croak. "Why are you doing this?" "Why?" Celine laughed, the sound sharp and ugly. "You really have to ask? You humiliated me, Lyra. In front of the entire pack. Made me look like some scheming little girl instead of the Luna I was meant to be. I never wanted to hurt you." "Shut up," Celine backhanded her across the face, hard enough to split her lip. "You don't get to talk. You don't get to apologize. You don't get to make this about your feelings." Lyra tasted blood. "What do you want from me?" "I want you to disappear." Permanently. Celine crouched down to meet her eyes. "See, the problem with what you did at the ceremony is that it made people think. Made them wonder if maybe the strong wolf doesn't always deserve to win. If maybe there's value in the weak and pathetic after all. That's not." "I said shut up." Celine's hand cracked across her face again. "You've caused enough trouble. But don't worry, it'll all be over soon. A tragic rogue attack, they'll say. Poor little Lyra and her vagrant husband, torn apart by wild wolves. Such a shame." Horror washed over Lyra as the full scope of her sister's plan became clear. This wasn't just about revenge or embarrassment. Celine genuinely wanted her dead. "Where's Kale?" she whispered. "Oh, don't worry about your hobo prince. He'll be joining you soon enough." Celine's smile turned vicious. "Though I have to admit, I'm curious about him. My hunters say he's more than he seems. Much more." "What do you mean?" But Celine was already walking away. "You'll find out soon enough. Both of you." Miles away, Kale stood in the clearing where he'd left Lyra, staring at the scuff marks in the dirt and the few drops of blood on the fallen leaves. His hands were perfectly steady, his face calm as stone. But the air around him had begun to shimmer with barely contained power. "Sir," the voice came from the darkness. A man stepped forward, tall, muscled, wearing black tactical gear. Behind him, four more figures emerged from the shadows like ghosts. "Report," Kale said quietly. "Multiple pack alliance as suspected. Blood Moon, Shadow Ridge, and Midnight. Professional operation. They've been tracking you for days. And you let them take her." The man's face went pale. "Sir, you ordered us to maintain distance. You said." "I know what I said." Kale's voice was still quiet, but something had changed in it. Something that made the man take an involuntary step back. "How long ago?" 15 minutes maximum. They're heading northeast to an abandoned facility about 12 miles from here." Kale nodded once. Then, without warning, the air pressure in the clearing dropped like a stone. The temperature plummeted. Every living thing in a half-mile radius went silent, as if sensing the approach of something ancient and terrible. When Kale spoke again, his voice carried an authority that made all 5 men drop instinctively to one knee. "Gather the others," he said. "All of them." "Sir, how many?" "Everyone." The word came out like a death sentence. "And send word to the council. Tell them the Alpha King is calling in old debts." The man's eyes went wide. "Sir, if you reveal yourself." "They took my mate." Kale's gray eyes had begun to glow with an inner light that had nothing human in it. "They made this personal." He looked toward the northeast, toward where they'd taken Lyra, and smiled. It was the most terrifying expression any of them had ever seen. Time to remind everyone why they used to fear the dark. The warehouse had been silent for over an hour when the first hunter collapsed. Lyra jerked awake from her pain-induced stupor as the man guarding the eastern entrance simply crumpled to the ground. No sound, no struggle. One moment he was standing, the next he was unconscious. What the hell? Marcus Reed, the Blood Moon Alpha, was on his feet immediately, his yellow eyes scanning the shadows. Report. Perimeter teams aren't responding, called one of his men from a radio station near the back wall. Sir, we've lost contact with everyone outside. Celine, who had been lounging in a chair nearby, stood up with a frown. That's impossible. We have 30 men surrounding this place. Another hunter collapsed. Then another. Something's wrong, Darius said, his voice tight with fear. This isn't normal. We need to. The warehouse lights went out all at once, plunging them into complete darkness. Emergency lighting kicked in a second later, bathing everything in eerie red light that made the shadows dance like living things. That's when Lyra felt it. Power. Raw, ancient, and absolutely terrifying. It rolled through the warehouse like a physical force, pressing down on everyone inside with the weight of absolute authority. Her wolf, still drugged and weak, whimpered in recognition and tried to bare its throat in submission. Oh God, she whispered, because she finally understood what she'd been sensing all along, what her wolf had been trying to tell her. The warehouse door exploded inward. Cale stood in the doorway, but he wasn't the ragged vagrant she'd married anymore. His torn clothes had been replaced by black tactical gear that fit his tall frame like it was custom-made. His messy hair had been pulled back, revealing the sharp angles of his face and those piercing gray eyes that now seemed to glow with inner fire. But it was more than his appearance that had changed. The air around him shimmered with barely contained power. When he stepped into the warehouse, the temperature dropped 10 degrees and every wolf in the building, Alpha, Beta, and Omega alike, felt their knees buckle. Hello, Marcus, Cale said conversationally, his voice carrying easily across the space. Victor. Elena. Marcus Reed, the Blood Moon Alpha who had never bowed to anyone in his life, found himself taking an involuntary step backward. Who are you? Cale smiled, and it was nothing like the gentle expressions Lyra had seen from him. This smile was cold, predatory, and absolutely merciless. I think you know. Then he shifted. But this wasn't an ordinary shift. Power exploded outward as Cale's human form melted and reformed into something that made every other wolf in the warehouse look like puppies. His wolf was massive, easily twice the size of the largest alpha present. His fur was midnight black shot through with silver that seemed to move like liquid mercury in the red emergency lighting. But it was his eyes that made Lyra's breath catch. In wolf form, they glowed with an otherworldly light that spoke of power beyond anything she'd ever imagined. This was the wolf of legends, the wolf that ruled all other wolves. This was the Alpha King. The effect on the room was immediate and devastating. Every single person dropped to their knees as if struck by invisible lightning. The alphas who had come here so confident, so sure of their power, were reduced to trembling subordinates who couldn't even lift their heads. Impossible, Marcus Reed gasped, his face pressed to the concrete floor. The Alpha King is dead. Has been for years. Cale shifted back to human form, the transformation as fluid as water. When he spoke, his voice carried the authority of someone who had ruled for centuries, who had commanded the loyalty of every pack in North America. Reports of my death, he said mildly, were greatly exaggerated. Lyra stared at him in complete shock. The homeless vagrant she'd married out of desperation was the most powerful werewolf in existence, the ruler of all packs. The legendary Alpha King who commanded absolute authority over every wolf on the continent. She'd married royalty without even knowing it. You're him, she whispered, her voice barely audible. You're really him. Cale's expression softened when he looked at her, becoming the gentleman she'd grown to care for. Hello, little mate, he said softly. I'm sorry I'm late. This is impossible. Celine shrieked from where she knelt on the floor, unable to rise under the pressure of his dominance. "You're nobody. You're nothing. I watched you at the ceremony. You were just a beggar." "I was hiding," Cale said simply. "But you made the mistake of taking something that belongs to me." He walked toward Lyra, and with each step, his power pressed down harder on everyone else in the room. Marcus Reed was openly whimpering now, his proud alpha nature completely shattered. Victor Kane and Elena Cross, the other pack leaders, were trembling so violently they could barely stay upright on their knees. "The bonds," Lyra said, tugging at the silver-lined ropes that still held her to the support beam. Cale touched the ropes and they simply dissolved, as if they were made of smoke rather than metal and fiber. He helped her to her feet with infinite gentleness, checking her over for injuries with careful hands. "Did they hurt you?" he asked, his thumb tracing the split in her lip where Celine had struck her. "I'm okay," she managed, though she was anything but. Her entire world had just been turned upside down. Good. Cale's voice went deadly quiet as he turned to face the people who had dared to touch his mate. "Because now it's my turn." "Please," Darius begged, his earlier arrogance completely gone. "We didn't know. We never would have, if we'd known who you were." "But you didn't care who I was," Cale interrupted, his gray eyes blazing. "You thought I was nobody, so you thought you could hurt my mate without consequences. You thought her life was worth nothing because she was just an Omega and I was just a vagrant." The power in the room intensified until the air itself seemed to vibrate with menace. "You were wrong on both counts." Celine tried one last desperate gambit. "She's my sister. This is a family matter. You have no right to interfere." Cale's laugh was like breaking glass. "Family." He looked at Lyra's battered face, at the rope burns on her wrists, at the terror in her eyes. "Is this how family treats each other in your world?" "She's nothing," Celine screamed, her composure finally cracking completely. "She's weak and pathetic and she is mine." The words came out like a death sentence. "She is my mate, my queen, and under my protection. Anyone who harms her answers to me." The warehouse fell into absolute silence except for the sound of terrified breathing. Cale looked around the room at the cowering pack leaders, at the unconscious hunters, at the woman who had tortured his mate out of jealousy and spite. "I think," he said conversationally, "it's time for some new management in your territories." And as his power settled over the room like a shroud, Lyra realized that her quiet, gentle husband wasn't just the Alpha King. He was the most dangerous man in the world. And he'd chosen her. 3 days later, Lyra stood beside Cale in the center of the Grand Assembly Circle, a massive clearing that had served as the meeting place for pack leaders for over 2 centuries. She'd never seen it before. Omegas weren't allowed at high-level pack meetings, but now she was here as queen, wearing a simple but elegant black dress that had appeared in their temporary quarters with no explanation. Around them, representatives from over 50 packs formed concentric circles, their faces ranging from curious to terrified to awed. Word had spread fast. The Alpha King lived, and he was calling for justice. Cale stood perfectly still beside her, wearing formal black attire that somehow made him look even more dangerous than his tactical gear had. The silver threads in his hair caught the afternoon sunlight, and his gray eyes held the kind of cold authority that made even the strongest alphas keep their distance. "Bring them forward," he commanded, his voice carrying easily across the vast clearing. Marcus Reed, Victor Kane, and Elena Cross were escorted to the center of the circle by Cale's personal guard, men and women who had appeared seemingly from nowhere but moved with military precision. All 3 pack leaders looked broken, their earlier arrogance replaced by the hollow-eyed resignation of those who knew their fate was sealed. Behind them, bound in silver chains and flanked by 4 guards each, came Celine and Darius. Lyra's heart clenched as she saw her sister for the first time since the warehouse. Celine looked terrible. Her perfect hair was tangled, her designer clothes torn and dirty, her blue eyes wild with desperate fury. But even now, even faced with the assembled might of the werewolf world, she held her head high with stubborn pride. Darius, in contrast, looked like he was about to collapse. His face was pale and haggard, his hands shaking so badly the chains rattled with every movement. When he saw Kale, he immediately dropped to his knees. "Your Majesty," he gasped, using the formal address for the Alpha King. "Please, I beg you." "Silence," Kale's voice cut through his pleading like a blade. "You will speak when spoken to and not before." He turned to address the assembled packs, his presence commanding absolute attention. "We are here to render judgment on those who conspired to murder the Alpha Queen and her mate," he announced. "Marcus Reed, Victor Kane, and Elena Cross, you accepted payment to hunt and kill your rightful rulers. How do you answer?" "Guilty," Marcus whispered, his head bowed. We didn't know who you were, but that doesn't excuse what we did. We accept whatever punishment you deem fit." Victor and Elena echoed his words, their voices barely audible. Kale nodded once. "Your honesty in this moment will be remembered. Your territories are forfeit, your alpha status stripped. You will live, but as rogues, banished from all pack lands for 10 years. If you can prove yourselves worthy in that time, you may petition for readmittance to pack society." It was a harsh sentence, but far more merciful than anyone had expected. A murmur ran through the assembled crowd. "As for you two," Kale said, turning to Celine and Darius. "Celine Morgan and Darius Kane, you stand accused of conspiracy to commit murder, kidnapping, torture, and treason against the crown. How do you answer?" "This is all lies," Celine burst out, her voice shrill with desperation. "Lyra is manipulating you. She's always been jealous of me, always tried to steal what's mine. She seduced you somehow, made you believe her sob story." "Celine, stop," Lyra said quietly, but her sister ignored her. "I'm the victim here," Celine continued, her chains rattling as she gestured wildly. "She's the one who caused all this trouble. She's weak and pathetic, everyone knows it. She doesn't deserve to be queen. I should be queen. I'm stronger, more beautiful, more delusional," Kale interrupted coldly. "Would you like to see the evidence of your crimes?" He raised his hand and images began to appear in the air above the clearing. Moving pictures that showed Celine meeting with Marcus Reed, planning the hunt, discussing how to make Lyra's death look like a rogue attack. The assembled packs gasped as they saw and heard everything. Celine's cold calculation, her pleasure at the thought of her sister's death, her complete lack of remorse or conscience. "Lies!" Celine screamed, though her voice had taken on a hysterical edge. "Those images are fake. She's controlling you, making you see things that aren't real. Lyra's always been manipulative, always trying to make people feel sorry for her." Enough! Kale's power slammed down on the clearing, forcing everyone except Lyra to their knees. "I have heard enough of your poison." He turned to Darius, who was openly weeping now. "And you, Darius Kane, what is your defense?" I have none," Darius sobbed. "Everything Celine said is true. I was weak, I was cruel. I let my pride and her ambition turn me into a monster. Lyra never deserved what we put her through. I know I don't deserve mercy, but I'm begging you. Please don't kill me. I'll do anything, accept any punishment, just please." "Your groveling disgusts me more than your crimes," Kale said with quiet contempt. "At least your co-conspirator owns her evil. You're just a coward who blames others for your choices." He looked between them both, his expression carved from stone. "Celine Morgan, Darius Kane, you are hereby stripped of all titles, all pack affiliations, and all rights within Werewolf Society. You are exiled permanently from all pack territories. You are declared rogue with no protection under pack law. Any wolf may kill you without consequence, and you may never seek sanctuary or aid from any pack member." It was a death sentence in all but name. Rogues rarely survived more than a few months in the wild. "Furthermore," Kale continued, It is hereby declared that any attempt to contact, approach, or harm the Alpha Queen will result in immediate execution. Celine finally seemed to understand the magnitude of what was happening. Her face crumpled, her earlier defiance replaced by raw terror. "Lyra," she whispered, looking at her sister with desperate eyes. "Lyra, please. You can't let him do this to me. I'm your sister. Your blood. You have to forgive me, you have to." Lyra looked at her sister, really looked at her. At the woman who had betrayed her, stolen her fiancé, tried to have her murdered out of jealousy and spite. The woman who had just spent 10 minutes trying to blame everyone but herself for her own evil choices. "No," Lyra said quietly. "I don't have to do anything for you ever again." She stepped closer to Cale, taking his hand in hers. The gesture was small, but its meaning was clear to everyone watching. "You made your choice when you decided my life was worth less than your ambition," Lyra continued, her voice growing stronger. "You chose Darius over your own sister. You chose to try to kill me rather than accept that maybe, just maybe, I deserved happiness too. But I'm your family," Celine screamed. "No," Lyra said with quiet finality. "You're not. Family doesn't do what you did. Family doesn't torture and terrorize and try to murder out of jealousy." She looked around the clearing at the assembled packs, at faces that had once mocked her and now looked at her with respect and awe. "This is my family now," she said. "This is my pack. This is my choice." Cale squeezed her hand gently, pride and love shining in his gray eyes. "Guards," he commanded. "Remove them from my sight." As Celine and Darius were dragged away, one screaming curses, the other begging for mercy that would never come, Lyra felt something inside her chest finally break free. She was no longer the weak Omega who apologized for existing. She was the Alpha Queen. And she was exactly where she belonged. 1 month later, Lyra stood in the same sacred clearing where her life had changed forever. But this time, instead of facing humiliation and rejection, she was about to be crowned queen. The transformation was breathtaking. The simple ceremony circle had been expanded into a magnificent amphitheater, with representatives from every pack in North America filling the terraced seating that had been carved into the surrounding hillsides. Banners bearing the royal crest, a silver wolf against a midnight sky, fluttered in the evening breeze. Lyra wore a gown that seemed to be woven from starlight itself, flowing silver fabric that caught the light of hundreds of torches positioned around the clearing. A delicate circlet of silver and moonstones rested on her dark hair, but it was her bearing that truly marked her as royalty. Gone was the hunched posture of the frightened Omega. She stood tall and proud, her shoulders back, her chin lifted, every inch the queen she was about to become. "My fellow wolves," Cale's voice carried across the vast gathering, commanding absolute attention. He stood beside her in formal black robes edged with silver, looking every inch the powerful Alpha King he was. "We gather tonight to witness the official coronation of your new queen." A cheer rose from the assembled crowd, but Lyra's eyes were drawn to a familiar section near the front. Her former pack, the Silver Creek Wolves who had once mocked and scorned her, were there, but their expressions were vastly different now. Where once there had been contempt and amusement, there was now awe and respect. Jake Morrison, who had once called her pathetic, was staring at her with something that looked like worship. Sarah Williams, who had mocked her thrift store dress, was openly weeping with what appeared to be regret. Even the pack elders who had watched her humiliation in silence were now bowing their heads in reverence. "Do you, Lyra Morgan," Cale continued, taking her hands in his, "accept the crown and all the responsibilities that come with it? Do you swear to protect the weak, guide the lost, and rule with wisdom and compassion?" "I do," Lyra said, her voice clear and strong, carrying across the clearing without effort. "Then by the power vested in me by the moon goddess herself, I crown you Lyra, queen of all werewolves, protector of the packs, and my eternal mate." The crowd erupted as Cale placed the royal crown on her head. a masterpiece of silver and precious stones that seemed to have been crafted specifically for her. But as the cheers died down, Lyra stepped forward to address her new subjects. "My first act as your queen," she announced, her voice carrying a new authority that made even the strongest alphas sit up and take notice, "is to establish new laws for the protection of those who cannot protect themselves." She paused, looking out over the sea of faces, many of them confused about where this was going. "From this day forward," Lyra continued, "no Omega may be rejected or cast out simply for being perceived as weak. No wolf may be denied basic rights, respect, or opportunity based solely on their designation. Strength comes in many forms, and we will honor all of them." The crowd was silent, absorbing this radical new concept. "Furthermore," Lyra said, her voice growing stronger, "any alpha who abuses their power to harm, humiliate, or mistreat those under their protection will answer directly to the crown. Leadership is earned through service, not taken through force." Now the cheers were deafening. She could see Omega wolves throughout the crowd weeping with joy, finally seeing themselves represented at the highest levels of power. Young wolves who had been told they were worthless were sitting straighter, hope blazing in their eyes. "These laws are not suggestions," Lyra concluded, her gaze sweeping over the assembled alphas. "They are royal decrees, backed by the full power of the throne. Any who violate them will face judgment not just from your king, but from your queen." As the ceremony concluded and the formal celebrations began, Lyra found herself surrounded by wolves who wanted to meet her, thank her, or pledge their loyalty. Former enemies bowed deeply, their earlier cruelty replaced by desperate attempts to curry favor. But it was near midnight when she finally had the moment she'd been waiting for all evening. Kale led her to a high overlook that gave them a view of the entire valley below. Thousands of campfires twinkled like stars, marking the locations of all the packs that had come to witness her coronation. The sight was breathtaking. A sea of light stretching to the horizon, representing hundreds of thousands of wolves now under their protection. "Any regrets?" Kale asked softly, taking her hand in his as they stood looking out over their kingdom. Lyra thought about everything that had brought them to this moment. The humiliation at the ceremony, the desperate marriage to a stranger, the terrifying journey and the revelation of his true identity, the confrontation with Selene and Darius, the justice served and the crown accepted. "None," she said with absolute certainty. "This is exactly where I'm supposed to be. Even though you never asked for any of this, the crown, the responsibilities, the pressure." Lyra smiled, remembering the broken, apologetic girl she'd been just weeks ago. That girl who had been so desperate to escape her circumstances that she'd married a complete stranger, who had been told she was worthless so many times she'd started to believe it. "I spent my whole life being told I wasn't enough," she said, squeezing his hand. "That I was too weak, too small, too unimportant to matter. But you saw something in me that no one else did. You saw that I was worth protecting, worth loving, worth building a life with." She turned to face him, this incredible man who had given up his anonymity and risked everything to save her. "Now I get to make sure no other wolf ever feels the way I felt. No one else will have to believe they're worthless. No one else will have to apologize for existing." Kale brought her hand to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles. "I love you, my queen. And I love you, my king." As they stood together on that hill, looking out over the vast territory that was now theirs to protect and guide, Lyra marveled at the journey that had brought her here. From rejected Omega to beloved queen, from broken and desperate to powerful and purposeful. She had found her strength, her voice, and her place in the world. And she was never going to let anyone make her small again.